was right in front of John Lennon there instantly, and hard to get to right at first. Then he wrote his name, John Lennon, and then underneath that, 1980.
You know those moments in history that everyone remembers exactly where they were? December 8th, 1980 was one of those nights. John Lennon, the voice of a generation, was gunned down outside his Manhattan apartment. The man who pulled the trigger, David Chapman, has spent the last 45 years behind bars, appearing before parole boards every 2 years since 2000, always denied, always rejected. But recently, in his latest hearings, Chapman has been saying things that have left the world speechless. After decades of silence, evolving explanations, and conflicting stories, he's finally revealing the unfiltered truth about why he murdered one of the most beloved musicians in history. And what he's saying changes everything we thought we knew about that terrible night. So grab a seat, because this is what David Chapman has revealed about John Lennon. And it's more disturbing than anyone imagined.
It's almost impossible for Mark Chapman to shoot John 4 times in the upper left chest area with 3 passing out in a direct line of fire.
The boy who wanted to be somebody. Let's go back to where it all began. Before the headlines, before the tragedy. Who exactly was David Chapman? He was born on May 10th, 1955, in Fort Worth, Texas. On paper, his life looked ordinary, the kind of story you'd expect from a quiet suburb. But inside his home in Decatur, Georgia, things were far from peaceful. His father was said to be harsh and unpredictable, which filled the house with fear and tension. For young Mark, that kind of environment left a mark. He escaped the only way he knew how, by disappearing into his imagination. He found comfort in stories, in characters who felt misunderstood. And then came a book that would change everything for him, The Catcher in the Rye. He didn't just read it, he lived it. Holden Caulfield, the book's main character, had this deep disgust for people he called phonies, those who pretended to be something they weren't. For Chapman, that idea took root and grew into something unhealthy. Over time, he began to see the world through that lens, labeling people around him as fake or false. As he grew older, his life had a few promising chapters. In his early 20s, he worked at a YMCA camp and even traveled overseas with the organization. Some people saw him as friendly and dependable. Others thought he was a bit off, someone carrying quiet storms inside. Eventually, he became a born-again Christian and got married to a woman from Hawaii. On the surface, it looked like he was trying to build something stable, something good. But underneath all that, cracks were forming. Depression crept in. The line between what was real and what was fantasy began to blur. And then came his fixation, John Lennon.
The cries of the crowd grow with pitch and volume, drowning out the whine of the jet engine. And here they are, fresh from their triumphant appearances in the United States.
By 1980, Lennon was more than just a musician. He was a global icon. Born on October 9, 1940 in Liverpool, he helped shape an entire generation's soundtrack with songs like Imagine, Strawberry Fields Forever, and All You Need Is Love. To many, Lennon represented peace, creativity, and rebellion wrapped in one. At that time, he was living in the Dakota, a beautiful but haunting-looking apartment building in New York City, with his wife, Yoko Ono, and their young son, Sean. After taking 5 years off from the spotlight to focus on being a dad, Lennon had just returned to music. His album Double Fantasy, a collaboration with Yoko, was doing incredibly well. Fans were thrilled. Critics praised his growth. It seemed like Lennon was stepping into a new, joyful phase of his life. But Chapman didn't see joy. He saw a contradiction. To him, Lennon wasn't a symbol of peace anymore. He was a hypocrite. That old quote from 1966, when Lennon said the Beatles were more popular than Jesus, stuck with Chapman. It festered. He couldn't shake the image of Lennon preaching love while living a millionaire's lifestyle. To most people, that wouldn't matter. But to someone already battling deep resentment and delusion, it became an obsession. Over time, Chapman convinced himself he had a mission. The man who once worked with kids, who once dreamed of making a difference, started plotting something dark. It wasn't a moment of madness. It was a slow, chilling unraveling that built over months. He studied Lennon's routines, his habits, even where he lived. Each detail fed the fantasy that would soon lead him to New York City and to one of the most shocking moments in modern music history. But how does someone go from being a quiet dreamer to committing an act that would stun the entire world? The plan. Mark David Chapman didn't just wake up one morning and decide to do it. He thought about it for months, planned it, went over it in his head until the idea became a mission. In October of 1980, 2 months before everything went down, he even showed up at the Dakota, the apartment building where John Lennon lived, hoping to see him. Lennon never came out, so Chapman went back to Hawaii, but that pull didn't go away. On October 27th, he bought a revolver, a 5-shot .38 Special made by Charter Arms. He was still in Honolulu then. A few days later, he was on a plane to New York, completely set on finishing what he started. But he had to figure out the details first. He even called the Federal Aviation Administration to ask how to fly with a gun. They told him bullets might get damaged during the trip, so he didn't pack any. Instead, he bought the ammunition after landing in New York. A few days before the shooting on December 6th, Chapman checked into the YMCA on the Upper West Side for a night. The next day, he switched to the Sheraton Hotel in Midtown. Small steps, like someone quietly arranging things before something big. On the morning of December 8th, he laid out a few personal items on the dresser in his room, his passport, an 8-track tape, and a Bible open to the Gospel according to John. He even scribbled Lennon next to the word John. When he finally left that room, he took the revolver with him. It was loaded with 5 hollow-point bullets, the kind that cause serious damage. On the way out, he stopped to buy another copy of The Catcher in the Rye. Maybe it was his way of grounding himself in that twisted logic he'd built around the book. Then he went straight to the Dakota. And he waited. December 8, 1980. The day everything changed. That whole day, Mark David Chapman hung around outside the Dakota, just passing time. He chatted with other fans, talked to the doorman, and tried to look like he belonged there. Early that morning, he actually missed seeing John Lennon step out of a taxi and go inside. But he didn't leave. He stayed. Around 5 in the evening, Lennon and Yoko Ono came out of the building to head to the record plant studio. Chapman stepped forward, and Lennon signed his copy of Double Fantasy. There's even a photo of that moment. Lennon looking calm, smiling like he always did, unaware of what was coming. Chapman later said he had second thoughts that day. For a moment, he almost went home, but the obsession was stronger, so he stayed. As daylight faded, he kept waiting near the Dakota's archway, blending into the night. Later, around 10:50 at night, Lennon and Yoko's limousine pulled up outside the building. They had gone to the studio and were coming home to say goodnight to their son before heading out again. Lennon stepped out first. Ono followed. Chapman called his name. Lennon turned around, and that's when Chapman fired. 4 bullets hit Lennon in the back. Lennon stumbled forward into the lobby and collapsed. The doorman quickly disarmed Chapman. Instead of running, Chapman just stood there. He took off his coat and hat so the police could see he had nothing else on him. Then he sat down on the sidewalk with The Catcher in the Rye in his hands, waiting to be arrested. Lennon was rushed to Roosevelt Hospital. He was 40 years old. And by the time they arrived, it was too late. News spread fast. Around the world, people woke up to the shock. Radio stations stopped regular programming. Fans gathered outside the Dakota, some in silence, others singing his songs. On December 14th, at Yoko Ono's request, there was a 10-minute silent prayer across the world. More than 225,000 people came together in Central Park. Millions more joined from home. It wasn't just grief, it was disbelief. Chapman was charged with second-degree murder. At first, his lawyers considered an insanity defense, and some experts believed he was mentally unwell. But others said he was aware enough of what he was doing. The court agreed he was competent to stand trial. During that time, Chapman talked about using the trial to bring attention to The Catcher in the Rye. He even imagined people reading it because of him. It's unsettling, but it shows how much he wanted to be noticed. Then, about 2 weeks before the trial began, he changed course completely. He said he felt God told him to plead guilty. His lawyers tried to stop him, but the judge decided he understood the decision he was making. He was sentenced to 20 years to life in a New York prison. For a long time after that, Chapman barely spoke. No interviews, no explanations, just silence. But silence never lasts forever. Breaking the silence. What Chapman has revealed. Mark David Chapman first became eligible for parole in the year 2000 after serving 20 years in prison. In New York, inmates like him get a hearing every 2 years. Since then, he's faced the parole board 14 times, the most recent being in August 2025. Each time, the answer has been the same. His next shot won't come until February 2027. Over the years, the way Chapman talks about what he did has changed. Early on, he sounded confused, sorry, but not entirely sure how to explain it. In interviews, he mentioned finding religion, saying he wasn't the same man anymore. He often described his past self as someone unrecognizable to him now. By the late 2010s, his tone shifted. In a 2018 hearing, Chapman talked about feeling more shame every year for taking John Lennon's life. Then, in 2020, he called his own actions despicable. He said he'd accept staying in prison forever if that's what the board decided. He described the murder as something selfish, a desperate grab for recognition, and admitted he'd done it purely because Lennon was famous. That honesty shocked people. But in recent years, Chapman has gone even deeper. The things he's said have revealed a man who fully understood what he was doing back then, and did it anyway. In transcripts from his August 2nd, 2022 parole hearing, Chapman admitted that he knew what he was doing was evil. He said he knew it was wrong, but he wanted fame so badly that he was willing to trade another person's life for it. There's no confusion in that statement, no attempt to pass blame. It's clear he made a conscious choice, one he now calls the worst decision of his life. During that same hearing, speaking from Greenhaven Correctional Facility, Chapman said it had nothing to do with anyone else. It was for him alone. He wanted to be somebody. He wanted to be remembered. He believed killing Lennon would make him into something more than just another ordinary person. When the parole board asked him why he wanted to kill Lennon, he said it was because he wanted to be famous, to stop being a nobody. It was, in his words, his answer to everything. Now 70 years old, Chapman no longer tries to justify any of it. He doesn't blame his parents, religion, or mental illness. He admits it was all him. He said that he understands the pain he caused, not just to Lennon's family, but to millions of people who loved his music. He knows there are people who will never forgive him, and he seems to accept that. Still, that hasn't softened how the parole board sees him. They've denied his release every time. Their reasons are always similar. They say his actions showed a complete disregard for human life, and that letting him out would send the wrong message to the world. Lennon's death, after all, wasn't just another tragedy. It left a hole that people still feel decades later. The woman who still fears him.
Mark Chapman has always stated, from the day he was arrested to now, that he shot John 4 times in the back. It's almost certain that John was shot in the front.
Before Mark David Chapman's first parole hearing in the year 2000, Yoko Ono wrote to the board asking that he stay behind bars for the rest of his life. Since then, every time his name comes up for review, she's made the same request. Decades have passed, but her answer has never changed. Yoko has often said that her concern isn't just about the past, it's about what could happen if he were ever released. She worries that if Chapman could take one life, he might take another. Maybe hers, maybe someone else's. That fear, even after all these years, has never fully gone away. It's been 45 years since that night outside the Dakota, yet the memory hasn't faded. Yoko still lives in the same building where it happened. Every year on December 8th, she lights a single candle in the window of John Lennon's old room. A quiet moment that speaks louder than any tribute ever could. Meanwhile, the world remembers in its own ways. Fans gather at the Strawberry Fields Memorial in Central Park, singing Lennon's songs from sunrise to sunset. Some bring flowers, some just stand in silence. Across the ocean, from October 9th, Lennon's birthday, to December 8th, the Imagine Peace Tower in Iceland glows every night, a column of white light reaching into the sky. It's a reminder of the peace Lennon stood for and the loss that still feels personal to so many. For Yoko, those rituals aren't just about memory. They're about keeping the balance between grief and strength, between the man she loved and the world he left behind. Her life, in many ways, has become a kind of quiet testimony to survival. 45 years of living with murder.
The exact circumstances of John Lennon's death over 40 years ago have been widely debated.
So after all these years, what has Mark David Chapman really admitted? It turns out there was never a complicated reason, no deep political cause, no mysterious voice in his head, no secret message hiding in a book. It was vanity, plain and simple. Chapman didn't kill John Lennon because he thought he was saving the world from a phony or exposing hypocrisy. He planned it because he wanted attention. He wanted his name to mean something. In his mind, ending the life of one of the most famous people on the planet would make him known too. He wasn't a confused man caught in a sudden moment.
Including the suggestion that detectives may have fundamentally misunderstood how the shooting happened.
He thought it through. He traveled, he bought the weapon, he waited. He knew what he was doing. And when he pulled that trigger, it wasn't out of anger or impulse. It was a calculated attempt to attach his name to history. The tragedy is that, in a twisted way, it worked. 45 years later, we're still saying his name, but not with admiration, with disbelief and disappointment. Chapman was sentenced to 20 years to life in prison in the early 1980s and has now spent more than 4 decades behind bars. He's 70 years old, serving his time at Greenhaven Correctional Facility in New York. Over the years, he's faced the parole board 14 times. Each time, the answer has been the same: denied. His next hearing isn't until the year 2027. By then, he'll be 72. And most people believe the outcome won't change. The board has said that despite his apologies and religious talk, he hasn't shown real empathy for what he took from the world. It's not that they doubt he's sorry. It's that they question what that sorrow really means when the damage is permanent. When you read through what Chapman has said in recent years, there's no redemption arc, no discovery of peace. It's just the unfiltered truth of a man who admits he wanted fame, knew it was wrong, and did it anyway. It's hard to find a moral in that story, only loss. John Lennon's legacy, though, couldn't be erased. He left behind Yoko Ono, their son Sean, and his older son Julian from his first marriage. His music still fills stadiums, radios, and quiet rooms everywhere. Imagine still plays at peace gatherings. All You Need Is Love still makes people sing. Decades later, the Beatles' songs still sell millions and inspire new generations. That's the contrast. Lennon wanted to make the world better through his art. Chapman wanted to make his mark through destruction. One left behind music, love, and peace. The other left behind a story people tell to remind themselves how dangerous obsession and ego can become. In a strange way, Chapman got what he wanted. The world remembered his name. But not for greatness, for taking something beautiful away. And even now, as he sits behind bars, the question lingers. Has he really faced what he did? Or is he still holding on to the one thing he always wanted? Attention. Because 45 years later, the world has moved forward. But every time his name resurfaces, we're reminded that fame can be the most dangerous kind of hunger. So what do you think about Chapman's confessions? Does expressing remorse after 45 years mean anything? Or is the damage too great to ever forgive? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you found this deep dive into one of music history's darkest moments compelling, give this video a like, hit that subscribe button, and ring the bell so you don't miss our next story. Because we've got plenty more untold truths, shocking revelations and deep dives into the moments that changed history forever.